This is Asia Trade. I'm Shery in Tokyo.
I'm Avril in Singapore. The top stories this hour. The U.S. issues a rare rebuke to Israel after an attack on Hamas officials in Qatar, an American ally. European leaders, too, denounce what they called a setback to peace efforts. President Trump is said to be prepared to impose sweeping new tariffs on India and China, but only if EU nations do so as well. And Asian stocks set for a subdued start, even as the S&P 500 nudged higher to a record on Fed rate cut hopes.
And I'm Annabelle Drewlers here at Semicon Taiwan, one of the largest semiconductor events in the world, where I'll be speaking with crucial players in the chip ecosystem on the biggest issues that their businesses face and how they're shaping their outlook for the future.
We'll be watching some of those tech names across Asia as well as they fuel the big gains across Wall Street. But take a look at the setup across Asia right now, because we're seeing Nikkei futures pointing to the upside after losses in the previous session. We are seeing Japanese yen trading a little bit higher against the U.S. dollar, really strengthening in the overnight session, as we heard from BOJ officials that could potentially be considering another rate hike this year despite the political instability. We also have breaking news out of South Korea, the jobless rate gaining to 2.6%. And also coming a little bit higher than economists has estimated at that 2.5%. We have seen government programs supporting the labor market in South Korea, but it seems that the jobless rate at least spiked a little bit. That, of course, has implications for the Bank of Korea. We are also going to get data out of China when it comes to factory gate prices, so do watch out for that. We have seen the dollar now rising for the first time alongside yields in a few days, so take a look at how U.S. futures are setting up. Stocks rose to another record high. Expectations of that Fed rate cut to come, given, of course, that we have seen the U.S. labor market perhaps performing slightly weaker than initially estimated, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And you can see right now U.S. futures pointing to a slight upside of 0.2%. We'll be watching those tech names very closely, like the likes of Oracle as well. We have seen Treasury yields also gaining ground for the first time in 5 sessions. And oil prices, take a look at crude, $63 a barrel, up 0.6%. Avril, of course, geopolitical tensions rising in the Middle East.
Indeed. And what does this tell us about U.S.-Israel relations after the U.S. made a rare public break with Israel after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's decision to launch an attack against Hamas in Qatar? Posting on Truth Social, President Trump says the strike did not advance Israeli or U.S. goals in the Middle East. Let's bring in Bloomberg editor Michael Heath. Mike, this is a dramatic escalation. Put things into perspective for us.
Yeah, Avril, it's basically unprecedented what Israel's done. I mean, Qatar has sort of been at the centre since basically Hamas's attack in October and after the initial, Israeli response. Qatar's been at the centre of the negotiating, efforts to release Israeli hostages, to get to ceasefires, and we've had a couple of brief ones, and also now to try to sort of conclude. To get some sort of lasting peace agreement. And the notion of then an airstrike, a strike there, targeting the Hamas negotiating team, I mean, it's just, it hasn't been seen before. And as I mentioned, it's unprecedented. And, in your introduction, you mentioned President Donald Trump saying that this doesn't advance the process towards peace. And certainly it doesn't if you're targeting negotiators on the other side. But it also, it sort of highlights, I think, in many respects, what the state of affairs here, that none of the sides appear to be particularly serious about trying to get to a solution on this. I mean, even President Trump's response, I think he was very, very, worried because Qatar's an important ally of the US. But, on Monday we had this terrorist attack in Jerusalem that's been linked to Hamas, where 6 Israeli civilians were gunned down on a bus. And then you've had Israel responding here in Qatar. So it just seems like while the talk is about peace, etc., everyone's still going their own way.
What does this mean also for other countries like Turkey that were helping in the mediating process as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably leads to a degree of nervousness in the region that you know, nothing really is off the table now for Israel. If it feels its security is at stake, and you know, Israel has this, it's a pretty conservative government, and we've mentioned this before, very, very right-wing, very nationalist, that really you know, if they feel that their security is at stake, they won't be restrained in terms of dealing with that. And I guess it just, you know, the whole question of how the US then balances this, because Israel is obviously a critical ally for the US, but a lot of these countries, you know, Qatar is a huge investor in the US. The biggest US base in the region is located there. I mean, it's a really delicate balancing act going on there, and Turkey as well. You know, they're sort of trying to manoeuvre themselves into being a major regional player too. So it just creates a lot of worry, I think, just about how it all unfolds going forward. Are we entering a new era? It's very difficult to understand at this stage.
Bloomberg editor Michael Heath, as we continue to watch the unfolding geopolitical tensions in the Middle East, we're also watching tensions in the trade environment because President Trump says he's willing to impose new tariffs on India and China, but only if EU nations do the same. Sources told Bloomberg that Trump made the request during a meeting with senior US and EU officials in Washington. The proposal is aimed at pushing President Vladimir Putin to the negotiating table with Ukraine. We're joined now by Bloomberg's digital politics editor Romy Verghese in California and MLive strategist Mark Cranfield in Singapore. Romy, let me start with you because we continue to see these tensions over trade and the fact that not every country wants more strict sanctions on Russia, especially in the energy sector. What does this new request mean?
Yes, this is another topsy-turvy day for global trade right now. I must say, the development about Trump making this request, but saying that the EU nations must agree to do so, you know, comes just before he said that he's going to engage in trade negotiations with India, and this really shows how Trump uses trade and deals as a way to keep people on their toes and try to get what he wants. So yes, we do have EU nations such as Hungary that have blocked more stringent approaches on Russia. But of course, the U.S. has already doubled the tariff on India to 50% because of its purchases of Russian crude. So we will see what happens when the U.S. and India continue their negotiations. I mean, Trump posted on Truth Social that he was looking forward to talks with his very good friend Modi, and that he didn't think it was going to be difficult to come to an agreement. So this is, you know, a note of optimism from Trump on this, even as this proposal is that they would increase tariffs on China and China and India over the Russia matter.
Romy, the other thing is how the Supreme Court could be fast-tracking its decision on tariffs. How much does this perhaps shift the implications when it comes to tariffs?
This would be huge. So the Supreme Court has agreed to hear the case in November, which means they might actually make a ruling on this in November. And this will really set the tone. Already, because of Trump tariffs, the U.S. has been collecting billions of dollars in tariffs. Now, if the Supreme Court does indeed say that these tariffs are legal, that Trump had the right to engage in these country-by-country tariffs, that will just bolster the president's powers, which have been pretty extensive indeed. But if the Supreme Court rules against these tariffs, say that these are illegal, these country-by-country tariffs, that means the United States will have to refund billions of dollars and also upend all these deals that the U.S. has already made, like with the EU, with South Korea. But I would not expect Trump to give up on tariffs. I mean, he's made it pretty clear that this is a centerpiece of his global and domestic agenda. And even if the Supreme Court rules against these tariffs, he has instituted tariffs under another kind of authority, these sector-by-sector tariffs, such as on steel and aluminum, which may have more solid legal basis. But yes, even if there's an adverse Supreme Court ruling, expect Trump to continue on his tariff agenda.
Mark, when it comes to the markets, at least U.S. stocks continue to push to new highs despite, of course, the geopolitical tensions. Will the trade headlines potentially make a difference? And what should we be watching out for this following week?
Well, investors are all focused on the Federal Reserve and where they're going. It's by far the biggest factor in terms of financial markets for the foreseeable future. Of course, changes to tariffs can make a difference, but when you're in a situation where the Federal Reserve is fully expected to lower interest rates, and already there's talk about it could be 50 basis points this month rather than 25 basis points. But it's not just about the next Federal Reserve meeting. It's the meetings to come in the months ahead. People are expecting that interest rates will come quite a lot lower in the US. You look at the revisions to the jobless data, that gives the central bank a lot of ammunition if they want to push further rate cuts, maybe through the end of the year. And then you've got the inflation data, which is coming. There's bound to be a knee-jerk reaction should we get surprisingly hot CPI data. But the bigger picture is that the jobs market is slowing quickly enough to really justify the Federal Reserve pushing rates a long way down, not just 25 or 50 basis points. People are thinking maybe up to 100 basis points in this cycle. So that's going to be the narrative which is helping to push US stocks to record highs, keeping Treasury yields very low, keeping the dollar on the back foot as well. So all of those dynamics are playing together, and it's very much how the Federal Reserve sets the policy for the next several months, which is really going to drive financial markets.
Romy, we heard from Mark about these BLS downward revisions. How bad are things looking in the labor market in the U.S.?
Well, these revisions are actually fairly expected, and it shows that, job growth was less robust than had been expected. And as my colleague was talking about, yes, this leads to the case for an interest rate cut. But the Trump administration, for instance, has criticized the integrity of this data, even though economists have not said that, have continued to say that there's no evidence for this. And we are in a post-pandemic environment where we will have, because of the difficulty of collecting this data, there will be revisions like these. So we should continue to expect large revisions, but we should also expect the Trump administration to use this as a way to say that Biden's economy was a disaster, the BLS is broken, to question the integrity of the data.
Mark, we've been seeing, as markets even digest these data points, the euro, the yen, given what's happening domestically, it's still been pretty range-bound. What are you watching out for?
I'm waiting to see the Bank of Japan really follow through on their threat to raise interest rates. So Bloomberg's been running a big story. The insiders from the Bank of Japan feel there's still a chance to raise interest rates this year, and traders are very skeptical. They've heard many times from Japanese officials that they're on the verge of raising interest rates. Somehow domestic politics gets in the way, or tariff negotiations with the United States. There's all kinds of excuses, and yet the Bank of Japan has still got interest rates at 0.5% for the cash rate, even though inflation has been running at 3% for some time. So that's holding back Japanese markets because of that. They do have 3 more meetings this year. The September one, nobody expects them to actually change interest rates, but certainly the press conference from Governor Ueda is a perfect opportunity for him to really address the fact and say, yes, Bank of Japan, everything's falling into place. We're going to raise interest rates in October or December. But traders really need a lot of convincing. If you look at where dollar yen is trading around 147, if you look at the way interest rates have narrowed in the short term between the US and Japan, very much in favor of a stronger yen. The yen should be around 130. Based on historical readings of where the rate differentials are, it should be 130, not 147. So you can tell the market needs to really be told over and over, yes, a rate hike is really coming, and here it is.
Mark, what does this mean for the bond markets? We have seen it really being called the value trap at this point. We do have that 5-year auction today as well.
Yeah, it's not going to be an easy one. The timing of this story obviously makes it a little bit more complicated for the 5-year JGB auction. But if you look at where the yields are and the whole curve actually in Japan, it's fully priced for at least a 25 basis point hike from Japan, whether it's this month or in a couple of months' time. So from that point of view, there's no issue. What we're more likely to see is a bit of flattening of the Japanese curve. If you look at the 20, 30, 40-year sectors, those yields have jumped up so far in relation to the short end of the curve. Japanese curve is the steepest within the G10 complex. So there's certainly room, as people think that the BOJ is getting a little bit more serious, there's definitely room for people to spend a bit more money at the long end of the curve, and they'll be encouraged by what they're seeing in the US and other parts of the world. Curves are beginning to peak around the world. That will filter through to Japan eventually. So between now and year end, we're probably going to see the Japanese curve move a little bit more in line with what we're seeing in the US and Europe. And that means probably we've seen pretty close to the peaks now for 30 and 40-year yields in Japan.
Bloomberg's Mark Cranfield, also Romy Varghese. Great to have you both. Thank you. We have more to come on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg. Apple has introduced its latest lineup of iPhones, including the thinnest version ever, featuring enhanced cameras and longer battery life. Alongside the phones, Apple introduced updated smartwatches and the AirPods as it looks to drive demand this holiday season. Let's bring in Bloomberg managing editor Mark Gurman. Mark, what was most exciting to you?
Oh, to me, it was the iPhone 17 Pro Max. Apple doubled down on the core competencies and really went after the things that people care about when it comes to smartphones with the 17 Pro Max. Improved heat dissipation, improved sustained performance, improved chipset, vastly improved camera, improvements to durability and scratch resistance on the display, new colors that people have been asking for. Overall, very nice package. The iPhone Air, very cool, innovative, completely impractical. Nobody should buy it. I think it's awesome, but it's just not a phone for most people. It's a peak of the future, but that doesn't mean you should buy it today.
Mark, people also care about the price tag or the lack thereof of a price hike. What did you make of that?
So what they did is sort of like silent price hikes. They upped the storage or doubled the storage on the base model of the iPhone Pro. Let me take a step back. They basically got rid of the $1,000 tier, right? And now they are just starting with the $1,100 tier. So to speak, they doubled the base storage to 256 gigabytes. The iPhone Air is also $1,000, which is wildly expensive. That's $100 more than the iPhone 16 Plus it replaces. So they didn't really raise prices. They sort of did, but it's nowhere near the $3,000 insane prices some quote-unquote analysts came on other TV programs to say what would be happening. So that's the reality.
I've been waiting to upgrade my AirPods. Anything interesting when it comes to other devices like smartwatches, AirPods as well?
I think the AirPods are the other hit of this event. Heart rate tracking in your earbuds. Are you serious? That's awesome, right? And this is going to get a lot more people interested in fitness and using programs like Fitness Plus. A huge win for Apple. I can't wait to try out the new AirPods. It's actually, I'm pretty excited for them. The only thing is I have an Apple Watch with heart rate and I have AirPods with heart rate. Like, which one is it going to use? How do those interact? I'm curious to dive into that. So yeah, you can tell I'm excited about the new AirPods.
Okay, we'll be waiting for your review of those products. Mark, thanks so much. Bloomberg Managing Editor Mark Gurman. Now, talking about new products, Nvidia plans to offer a new chip system that can handle demanding tasks such as video generation and software creation. For more, we're joined by our tech correspondent, Annabelle Jolis, at the Semicon event. Belle, what kinds of AI applications is this chip designed for?
Well, essentially it's designed for more complex and longer, bigger AI applications. I think there's sort of a couple of things that, just to set the context here, I mean, when it comes to AI, there's two major processes. There's AI training and then there's AI inference. So AI training and AI inference are both, until now, being done by the same type of GPU from Nvidia. And what the company is betting is that there needs to be a specific product that's built for the inference portion in particular, which is more talking to the deployment of AI. And so they're introducing this new product called the Rubin CPX. It's expected to debut at the end of next year. It's a sort of an offshoot of the broader Rubin infrastructure that's coming on board as well. But they're going to be in the form of a card that can be inserted into discrete computers or into computer server designs. But the main idea is that it can do reasoning with large amounts of data at once. And so then, to your point, I mean, it can handle complex projects, things like video generation or dealing with entire software designs, for instance. I mean, just much more complex projects, as we said, as AI becomes a lot more mainstream.
And Annabelle, Oracle also surging to record highs in extended trading. What's the story there?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a company, we know it's found a lot of success in the cloud computing market of late, and that really showed up in this latest report. I mean, huge increase in bookings that we saw in the period. They've also posted a very aggressive outlook when it comes to their cloud infrastructure business for the period ahead. And as you said, I mean, you can see that stock surge in after hours up 27%. But the point is, if that holds into the regular trading day as well, you're looking at a fresh record high for the company. So, I mean, it has been, as the company pointed out, a period where they signed multi-billion-dollar deals, so 4 different deals actually, or contracts with different customers as well, 3 different customers. They're looking at a big pipeline as well, so a lot more projects to come. But it also means more capex for the business, so they're spending a lot more heavily in the coming year than what was predicted. I mean, looking at capex of $35 billion in the coming 12 months. Wall Street was actually looking for $26 billion instead, so you're talking about a $9 billion difference when it comes to capex alone.
Belle, you're also at this semicon event in Taiwan. What are you expecting to hear, in particular, related to supply chains and innovation at this event?
Yeah, I think it's great timing, of course. It's always a good time to be talking about semiconductors, but I think this year it's really coming hot off the heels of continuing macro uncertainties, essentially, when it comes to tariffs, coming to the trade outlook as well. I mean, we just had President Trump, for instance, a few days ago, threatening substantial tariffs on semiconductor imports if companies aren't moving at least a portion of their business to the States. So there's continued demand, or concerns rather, that we continue to hear around demand for AI chips. I mean, that's another talking point. We're going to be speaking with some of the suppliers to TSMC, for instance. What are they seeing on the ground? Are they still seeing big demand for their products? And what does that tell you as well about how the ecosystem is evolving? And then, of course, you can't forget the likes of Cambricon, Huawei. You know, the advancement we're seeing in China's semiconductor ecosystem, is it starting to narrow the gap with heavyweights like Nvidia, TSMC, for instance? I mean, what are companies and analysts thinking about that? So a really great lineup ahead. I mean, we're starting off, of course, is how we've got the president of the Semi Association joining us in just a few minutes from now, but really great businesses across the day.
Yeah, looking forward to all of that from Semicon Taiwan with our Bloomberg tech correspondent, Annabelle Drulers. We have more on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg. Take a look at how U.S. futures are trading at the moment after reaching those record highs in the overnight session. We had, of course, seen that soft jobs data, the U.S. labor market significantly weaker than initially estimated by BLS. So we had seen that surge in expectation of Fed rate cuts. You can see the dollar holding steady after gaining ground for the first time in a few days already, with yields also rising for the first time in 5 sessions. Of course, we are still bracing for inflation readings out of the U.S. We have more ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg. Take a look at how oil is trading early in the Asia session. Of course, we saw that climb after more geopolitical tensions in the Middle East, especially with Israel conducting that strike against senior Hamas leaders in Doha. We have seen the oil prices spiked also overnight, but we have to consider the longer-term dynamics as well, because it's been on a downtrend given the supply dynamics as well. Brent at the moment sitting at that $66 a barrel level. Let's bring in Rudman, professor at the University of Virginia. She previously served in both the Obama and Clinton administrations, including as Deputy Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs. Really great to have you this morning. So tell us a little bit about how significant this attack by Israel on Doha is, given that we are now seeing two American allies, really the tensions escalating between the two sides.
Yeah, I think that the question is less about Israel striking Hamas leaders and more that they struck them inside Qatar, in Doha, as you pointed out, and did it at exactly a time when, by all reporting, those leaders, the Hamas leaders, were considering and evaluating the proposal that President Trump had just put forward for a ceasefire in Gaza. So it's very, very challenging action by Israel, and I think is evidenced by the very strong statement, unusually strong statement, that the Trump White House put out criticizing the action.
Are we expecting more action to come from the White House? Well,
President Trump apparently has made a statement that it was reported that in his calls to the calls that he held with the Qatari leader, the prime minister there, and with Prime Minister Netanyahu, the way that the White House reported out the call was to say that President Trump had committed that no further actions would be occurring in Qatar. I don't know that he's in a position to make that commitment given what just happened.
Yeah, to your point, given how we've seen Israeli trying to eradicate Hamas leaders in Syria, Lebanon, Iran, do you think this adds to that emboldenedness for the Israeli sides, given how the U.S. has responded? I mean, to what extent do you think this was part of Israel's calculus?
I'm not sure at this point what Israel's calculus is, to be honest. It should be very important to Israel to have the United States with them. And it seems to me pretty clear from the statements, again, that the White House has put out that they were not made aware by Israel of this action. I think if they had been made aware, they would have pushed fairly hard for it not to occur. President Trump has been really clear, and there's a lot of things I don't agree with him about, but he has been pushing for a ceasefire. He put forward a proposal. Hamas was considering that proposal. By what President Trump himself had reported out last night was that Israel had accepted this proposal. Israel knew that Hamas was considering the proposal, and they took this action anyway. And so, again, I can't begin to understand the calculus on the part of Israeli political leadership.
Do you still see there as being a way to revive truce talks? Is there a possibility of that? I mean, the Qataris themselves saying they will not stop mediation for different issues in the region.
Well, it's significant that the Qataris have said that. The Qataris, of all people, given where this happened, but they also really hold as kind of a national commodity for the country their ability to act as negotiators, to act as facilitators. And that's clearly what they are pressing forward with here. Was a difficult ceasefire?
Right. Professor,
made much more
we'll
difficult,
have to interrupt this conversation slightly because we do have President Trump speaking at the moment, and we want you to take you live to those comments.
It's not the way I speak, and anybody that's covered me for a long time knows that's not my language. It's nonsense. And frankly, you're wasting your time. All you do is trying to get off the great success of D.C. and about 200 other things we've done that are so successful. This is a great, great success, and we have so many. I don't think any president in their first 8 months has had anywhere near the success that we've had.
So will you meet with the Epstein victims? Do you plan to meet with?
I don't know about. Nobody suggested that. Certainly, I don't like that whole situation with respect to anybody being abused or hurt. But I haven't even thought about that. Thank you all very much. Have a good time. Thank you.
We're hearing there Trump commenting and how he will give a full statement on Israel tomorrow. Professor, you were just talking about how this is a significant point that Qatar is committing to that mediation role.
And Qatar, to be clear, has doubled down, recommitted to their mediation role even after this strike. That said, what was already difficult in terms of achieving a ceasefire has been made significantly more difficult by the actions that Israel took today.
Mara, we understand that there are dozens of Hamas officials also residing in Istanbul and Ankara. Could we expect a similar attack on Turkey, perhaps?
There are, from the Israeli perspective, they've clearly signaled before this that anywhere in the world is fair game for them if there are Hamas leaders who have participated, who were part of what happened, the horrific actions on October 7th, 2023 in Israel. So they have signaled that. I would also expect, though, that this White House, this administration is doubling down going forward on their conversations with the Israelis about not going forward if those plans are in the works while these very delicate discussions are ongoing, whether it's in Qatar, in Turkey, in any other country.
Professor, are you expecting some form of a congressional response to all this?
I think in the past I might have said that before President Trump's administration, but our Congress, the majority of which in the House and the Senate is controlled by Republicans, has become almost dormant in terms of taking actions or reactions. In this case, there may be some room for them to do something that is supportive in some way of what President Trump has said, but very unclear. That's not. I would not put high hopes in Congress standing up and doing the right thing right now.
Professor, great to get your insights. Thank you for your analysis on this. Mara Rudman is professor at the University of Virginia. Now, some other political stories we're following. Nepal's prime minister has reportedly resigned as violent protests continue across the country. The Press Trust of India says KP Sharma Oli stepped down after hundreds of demonstrators stormed his office. The unrest stemmed from a government ban on social media platforms, which has since been lifted, but protesters are now calling for action against poor governance in Nepal. Hundreds of South Korean workers detained in a U.S. immigration crackdown in Georgia are reportedly set to return home. Yonhap says the workers will board a chartered flight this afternoon. It comes as Korea's trade delegation also heads back after finishing working-level talks with U.S. officials in Washington. Yonhap says the talks focused on working out specifics for the trade deal struck in July. French President Emmanuel Macron has named Sébastien Lecornu to be the country's new prime minister. Lecornu, a defense minister, will become the country's fifth prime minister in 2 years. The last two premiers were ousted after trying to pass budgets that would sharply reduce France's deficit, which are the widest in the euro area. And Indonesia's new finance minister thinks the economy could grow by more than 6% in the near future, which is up from the current pace of 5%. Purbaya Yudi Sadewa also argues that it's possible to boost growth without increasing debt by speeding up the rollout of Indonesia's existing programs and budget. Let's take a look at some of the currencies that are in focus. We have been seeing the Indonesian rupiah steep declines of about 1% just a day ago. For the moment, EM currencies are really focused on the path of the Fed's rate cut, and the euro against the greenback has been pretty range-bound despite everything that's going on in the euro area. More ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg.
Take a look at how we're setting up for the Asia market opens. We'll be watching some of those tech names after Oracle share surged to record highs in extended trading. It announced an increase in bookings, an aggressive outlook for its cloud infrastructure, and of course we had Nvidia also planning to offer a new product designed to handle demanding tasks such as video generation, software creation, not to mention new products from Apple as well. So what a time to go to Semicon Taiwan, which begins today, bringing together top names in the semiconductor industry to discuss critical issues such as AI chips, also shifting supply chains. Let's cross over to Taipei, where our Asia tech correspondent Annabelle Drulers is with our first guest. Belle.
Thanks, Shery. Yeah, as you said, it's a really great timing for this event. And I think as well, I mean, I was just speaking here with the SEMI president, Ajit Manocha, but record attendance this year. So 100,000 people expected to come through the door. So thanks very much for joining us this morning, Ajit. And we can start off. I mean, what are your key agenda items going into this event?
Well, as you said, record attendance, because the momentum is really high. And momentum is really because of so many inflections in the industry. Especially AI is fueling the growth, unprecedented growth because of AI. And quantum is around the block. So most people are interested in understanding how to enable the growth and how to really benefit from the innovation by more collaboration with Taiwan. I mean, Taiwan has really established itself the landmark of innovation, landmark of technology, landmark of manufacturing, everything. I mean, Taiwan has become not only the household name when it comes to semiconductor, it has become the kind of the way I say it, if you ask people semiconductors, and the first region they will talk about is Taiwan.
Taiwan, though, is I mean, the companies here are still under pressure. We don't know what's going to happen, for instance, with tariffs. We just had President Trump a few days ago threatening substantial tariffs on companies that aren't at least moving some of their operations to the U.S. How are you also engaging with companies in that way or that topic?
That's a good question, but I tell you, first of all, SEMI is very politically agnostic. We don't really comment upon this geopolitics topics when it comes to versus country or companies. But the important thing is this. These things are going through a lot of discussions right now. The most important thing is that every company and every country has very clear goals and strategic directions. My guidance to them is just focus on your strategic directions, and these things will settle. They will get settled sooner or later. Also, my guidance is do not do retaliation and work with the counterparts, negotiate, and keep moving. I'm very confident within a few months to come, things will get settled. Things change every day. So to make comment and reaction on what happened today will change tomorrow. So I find it not necessary to reflect too much on that.
One of the concerns that you hear from companies that are looking at moving to the US from this part of the world is also hiring and the availability of talent in the US as well. And then you sort of add headlines on, for instance, we had the raid on the Korean plant that's being built, the battery plant in the US also a few days ago. I mean, how as well do you think companies can deal with those issues or all those threats, I guess, as well?
Well, first of all, the talent is a real challenge. I mean, as the industry is doubling in the IC revenue, what happened in 60, 70 years will double in the next 6 to 7 years. But STEM education has been going down in the Western world. And in the Asian countries, the population of STEM population is going down because the number of children to couple has gone down by a factor of 2 in the last 20 years. So it's a real challenge. So the way SEMI is addressing is on a global basis, we're addressing the talent shortage problem. So expedite the STEM education, the reskilling of people, in incentivizing schools for more STEM enrollment. So there's a comprehensive program from soup to nut. So we have started this at a global level as well as the national level in all the countries. So it's going to take time. Now, for example, in U.S., when you asked, in U.S., one thing which is very meaningful for us is reskilling veterans. In U.S., the Department of Defense releases more than 200,000 veterans every year. And we are putting a big focus on reskilling those folks into semiconductor industry. And that's going to be a big success for us. We already started creating a talent pipeline there. Now, same thing can happen in Taiwan also. The president of Taiwan asked me for that 3-4 years ago. And we can bring the playbook to other parts of the world. But besides that, main thing is reskilling, So we have also launched Semi University, where we have more than 700 online courses. We can help the students while they're studying and get some industry context so that they're ready to roll.
One of the things as well we've watched over the last few months is the advancements we see from the China chip players as well. I mean, there's the designer, for instance, Cambricon, that's really caught the attention of a lot of investors, but there's Huawei. I mean, there's more threads. I mean, there's a lot of players within that ecosystem now, but what do you make of the gap between the US and Taiwan versus China, and is that closing at all, in your opinion?
Well, I'm sure everybody's trying to close the gaps. But the gaps are also growing because there's so much to happen. I think what we've seen on AI is just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more to come. A lot more has to happen. So I don't think people know what the gaps are exactly. But we know that there's so much yet to happen. I mean, look, AI was first talked about in 50, 60 years ago. And nothing happened. And now all of a sudden there's a momentum. And people are starting to pay attention and seeing the benefits of AI. So I see the growth in the industry. 50% of the growth of the industry is AI-enabled chips. So I think we got a long ways to go yet. So the gaps more we invest, I think we will advance, and probably those who invest less will have bigger gaps to close.
All right, Ajit, thanks very much for your time this morning. That was Ajit Manocha there, the semi-president, as of course we get Semicon Taiwan underway this morning with a record 100,000 attendants expected to come through these doors, Avril.
Yeah, and kicking off the event with some great conversations there, Annabelle Jolas in Taipei for us. Of course, our coverage of Semicon Taiwan continues in the coming hour when chip research and design company IMEC joins us to discuss their business strategy. And later, we'll be hearing from TSMC supply chain member C-Sun, as well as Taiwanese chip testing and packaging services provider PTI. We'll also talk humanoid robotics with Infineon. In the meantime, the latest from the corporate front, Microsoft reportedly set to use Anthropic's AI models in Office 365, marking its biggest move yet to reduce reliance on OpenAI. Tech news outlet The Information reported that Anthropic's Claude reportedly outperforms GPT-5 in tasks such as building PowerPoint decks and handling financial functions in Excel. OpenAI models will still power some Microsoft Copilot's features, but Anthropic will take on more advanced work, all at the same $30 per user per month. Shares of major lithium producers slipped after news that CATL is gearing up to restart its lithium mine sooner than previously anticipated. Executives are said to have asked for frontline workers to be recalled. Production at the Tianxiawo mine, was stopped last month due to an expired license, stoking speculation it was part of China's tougher stance on overcapacity. An Indian appeals court has directed the country's securities regulator to respond to allegations that it withheld documents crucial to Jane Street's defense in a market manipulation case. The regulator has been asked to reply within 3 weeks to Jane Street's claims. SEBI has accused the trading firm of market manipulation to book hefty profits. More ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg.
Take a look at how Japanese assets are setting up. The Japanese yen holding at that 147 level against the U.S. dollar. Remember the losses that we saw after the announcement of Prime Minister Ishiba resigning. We have a date for the new election when it comes to the leadership of the ruling LDP. That will be October 4th, and it will be a full-scale contest with the participation of over 1 million rank-and-file party members from across the nation. Take a look at Nikkei futures at the moment, not doing much after we saw losses in the previous session. But let's bring in economics reporter Yoshiaki Nohara, because, of course, Yoshi, we also had some comments from Bank of Japan officials that led to this move in the Japanese yen as well.
Well, it's an interesting, delicate situation for the Bank of Japan. The Bank of Japan still see the possibility that they may be able to raise the interest rate again by the end of this year amid the political uncertainty which is rising due to the resignation of the Prime Minister Shiba. So the bank is saying that there's a possibility for rate hike still because the economy itself is not doing bad. If you look at data, wages are up and prices are up and consumption is holding up. But at the same time, there's a lot of talk among the policymakers that whether the government is inclined to spend more to help people with more with inflation.
Yoshiaki, we're also waiting out for the results of Japan's 5-year bond auction for today. This will be the first debt sale following Ishiba's resignation. Do you think it will pass safely?
Well, I'm hearing that the auction of this maturity of debt is going to be received well by the markets because like I said, there's a kind of a caution among BOJ watchers that whether the political uncertainty is going to at least delay the BOJ's rate hike, which is a good news for bonds. At the same time, this range of JGBs are not that susceptible to the concerns that investors are expressing about fiscal concern of the nation's debt situation.
Economics government reporter Yoshiaki Nohara there with the latest here in Japan. Of course, we'll be looking forward to that 5-year JGB auction. Also, the market opens. And we're also watching some of those stocks that will be trading at the open, not only in Japan, but also Australia and South Korea. Apple suppliers, for example, will be in focus after the tech giant introduced its latest lineup of iPhones, including the thinnest version ever, featuring enhanced cameras and longer battery life. Also, broadly, tech stocks could be reacting to Oracle hitting a record high in extended trading. The company posted a major increase in bookings and gave an aggressive outlook for its cloud infrastructure business. LG Energy Solution will be to watch in South Korea. Kyongyang newspaper reporting it's effectively halted construction at all 4 of its U.S. battery plants after U.S. authorities detained Korean workers in an immigration raid last week. LG Energy is currently building plants in Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, and Ohio, which is a joint venture with Hyundai. Market opens in Sydney, Seoul, and Tokyo are next. This is Bloomberg. This is the Asia Trade. We're counting down to Asia's major market opens, watching everything related to oil. Avril, of course, we have that Israel attack on Hamas leaders in Qatar and, of course, rising geopolitical tensions, but also perhaps more news on U.S. tariffs, especially when it comes to new levies on India and China.
That's right, to step up pressure on Russia. But Trump also says that he will only raise these tariffs on India, China, if the EU does the same. So certainly the geopolitical backdrop is a focus here, Shery.
Yeah, geopolitical backdrop, also a trade backdrop. So we'll be watching also the monetary backdrop because we'll be watching what the Bank of Japan officials have been telling Bloomberg. We have heard that they're still considering rate hikes this year despite the political instability that we're seeing in the country. Remember, we finally got a date when it comes to the leadership election of the ruling LDP. That would be October 4th after the resignation of Prime Minister Ishiba. Take a look at how Japanese stocks are coming online. We're seeing a little bit of upside of 0.1%. We had seen some losses in the previous session for Japanese equities. The yen is holding at that 147 level. We have seen some strength on the back of those comments coming from BOJ officials to Bloomberg. And we've been watching JGB yields. 159 is your level. We do have the 5-year auction. We have seen some of the steepest yield curves here in Japan among developed economies. Take a look at how South Korea is also coming online. We're watching some of those tech stocks in Japan, South Korea as well. Of course, we do have those new products from Apple, a new product from Nvidia as well. The KOSPI gaining 0.4 0.4% at the open. Of course, we had seen gains in the previous session as well. We had August jobless rate in South Korea coming out at 2.6%, slightly higher than economists had expected, but still a strong picture for the labor market in South Korea, which will have big implications for the Bank of Korea as well. The Korean won weakening a little bit at that 13.89 level against the dollar, Avril.
Yeah, when you talk about jobs data, you can't forget what we got from those BLS downward revisions as well in the U.S. after already a dismal picture the labor market was showing us from data last week. So the focus also now shifts to the CPI print from the U.S. at the end of the week. And we did see Treasury snapping a 4-session advance overnight. But look at how we are seeing a bit of a tick up on the U.S. 10 years, yields down by almost 2 basis points. The Aussie looking flat against the greenback. Worth noting that when it comes to Australian stocks at the open, we're seeing a slight decline yesterday. The names that were coming under pressure were the banking as well as the energy-related names. Take a look at how Brent is faring. We did see that spike after the Qataris, or rather the Hamas leadership in Qatar, were attacked by the Israelis, but that gain was quickly eroded. We're seeing Brent for the moment sitting below the 67 handle, Shery.
Right, let's bring in our next guest who says the JGB market is one of the world's most challenging at this time. With us now is Robert Tipp, Chief Investment Strategist and Head of Global Bonds at PGIM. Robert, really great to have you here in the Tokyo studio. Let's talk a little bit first about the 5-year auction here in Japan that we have, of course, today. We do have 20 and 40 yields coming up. What will you be watching?
Yeah, I think the markets are going to be digesting this news from the Bank of Japan. It feels like the bank had just really convinced everyone they were looking at underlying service inflation, which is running in the 1% area. And, now they're coming out with the notion of there could be a hike this year. So in some sense, that's a surprise, in some sense not. The inflation numbers, a good portion of it, if you don't strip out various factors, are well above target. And the yen is weakened. It's weakened not just along with other world currencies, but more than. And we're looking at a move pushing 10%. So I think it's going to be, still an environment where JGB yields are fishing for that level that really brings in strong demand.
And it's really interesting the timing of these BOJ officials' comments, right? Given that, of course, there's been a lot of speculation that the BOJ will have to really delay that rate hike given the political instability here. How do you factor in those dynamics, given that we do continue to see those inflationary pressures also in place?
Right. I don't know that this is orchestrated, but in some respects, if I wanted to stabilize the yen as an inflation driver after seeing the revisions in U.S. payrolls and the weaker data, that would be a good time to come in and point out the contra-directionality of the policies to highlight, Japanese rates are going up, U.S. rates are going down. You should have a stable or firmer yen. Suggest that to the market.
Robert, some of our strategists have highlighted, though, for the markets to take the BOJ seriously on the potential rate hike, maybe October, maybe December, they're going to have to keep reiterating that. How seriously are you taking the odds of a BOJ hike?
Right. Well, I think we're going to have to watch and see how the data goes and how the markets behave, because the fact of the matter is the services inflation is quite low at a deep core level. And if you have U.S. rates dropping and the yen firming already, then they may become concerned that the inflation outlook is not going to hold up, that risk is there, and that they would want to wait for the wage data. The other moving part here, the tariffs and the impact of the tariffs. Right now, there seems to be, some of that anxiety has attenuated. But as we all know, it's a very dynamic environment. There's a lot of discussion about what Japan's investment means, what is the structure of that, and then that, of course, brings into question, given what's gone on with India and other places, where are these tariffs really going to end up? So I think there are a tremendous number of moving parts. I think if you get to April and everything is going well, then you're going to have a hike. But I think as we saw with the first hike, you can't rule out a quick change in direction based on the market, based on the economic data, in particular the yen.
Talk to us about U.S. rates. How do you position?
So I think the positioning in the U.S. is quite heavy. There's been a notion among market participants that there would be a bull steepener. The back-end rates really haven't rallied. I mean, if you think about it, the 10-year got to 4.25 originally in late 2022, and it's just, recently kind of shifted below that. It's been in a range around those levels. The front end, though, is doing very well. At this point, the market is pricing in, over 100 basis points of rate cuts. So some combination of soft growth, staff changes at the Fed that would err on the dovish side, even though inflation looks like it's going to continue to be above target. You really are at risk of these kinds of movements where you get the good news for the market and then you get a sell-off, as everyone is already positioned for that. So I think it's going to continue to be, despite an overarchingly good environment for fixed income, yields are high, especially on spread product. Returns on the higher yielding sectors have been good. If you're just looking at duration timing in the market, it's going to continue to be a very tactical trading market.
How does the U.S. compare to what's happening in Europe? We just saw French yield spreads really topping Italy's for the first time ever. I mean, they have their own fiscal issues over there.
Right. Yeah, so in places like Japan, the United States, we have our swap spread, and that's a tradable vehicle. But obviously in Europe, you have all of the countries trading on varying spreads to swaps. And there's been a trend of the core weakening, with Germany underperforming quite a bit. France has been an outlier. They've been on their own cycle since the middle of 2024 when the elections were called. In the end, France is going to be a member of the Eurozone. In the end, France is going to be a fairly highly rated credit. But between now and then, there's going to be quite a bit of volatility. So I think it's an excellent vehicle for trading. I think the European peripheral story has been a good one, basically, for 13 years running. But France has always stood out as really a weak credit, weak growth, weak fiscal dynamics that were destined to come home to roost at some point in time. And now we'll see if they can turn the ship around, tighten things up enough to stabilize the situation. But like with so many developed countries, I don't think it's going to be easy.
Robert Tipp, it was really good to have you with us, Chief Investment Strategist at PGIM, of course, with a look at all of the big global bond moves that we're seeing across the world. But take a look at LG Energy Solutions, because we have had the latest about their halting construction at all of their U.S. plants. And this was the last close down, 0.7%. We are now seeing it continue to drop in the Korean early session. This, according to Kyonghang News, that 4 of their U.S. battery plants, after U.S. authorities detained Korean workers in an immigration raid last week, have now been closed. Of course, we'll be watching all of those other investments from Korean firms, including the Georgia EV plant run by Hyundai as well, Avril.
Yeah, and among the stocks that we're also watching in the session, this includes some of the tech names. Of course, we'll be watching the Apple suppliers after the tech giant launched its iPhone 17 lineup, and it had these secret price hikes, as our colleague was talking about earlier. The ultra-thin model, of course, has been quite well received. In the meantime, taking a look at these chip names, particularly SK Hynix in South Korea as well, almost 3% higher, adding on to the gains of already that we saw in yesterday's session. We're hearing about what these corporate gains taxes in South Korea might look like. Of course, South Korean markets have also been spurred on by the bets of Fed rate cuts. Let's also get to Semicon Taiwan, where our tech correspondent, Annabelle Droles, is standing by for a preview of what's coming up. Belle?
Thanks, Avril. Yeah, Semicon Taiwan is just getting underway. The doors have opened and 100,000 people expected to be attending this event, but huge lineup as well of guests. So we've got IMEC, for instance, joining us this hour. This is often dubbed the world's largest R&D facility for semiconductors. But after that as well, conversations with some key TSMC suppliers. So we have, for instance, CSUN that provides equipment. You've also got the OSAT companies, so packaging, testing. That'll be up with PTI, plus a conversation about the demand for chips in autos, humanoids, and more. We've got Infineon's CEO joining us as well. So this is all exclusive. Plenty more ahead. This is Bloomberg.
I'll be giving a full statement tomorrow, but I would tell you this. I was very unhappy about it, very unhappy about every aspect, and we got to get the hostages back. But I was very unhappy about the way that went down.
President Trump, after Israel launched an attack on Hamas leaders in the Qatari capital of Doha, and you can see oil prices now continuing to gain ground. Early in the Asian session, we're talking about 3 days of advances of this news. Of course, Israel conducting the strike in Doha and perhaps really providing a major blow to those U.S.-supported efforts to normalize ties with Gulf Arab nations. Bloomberg editor Michael Heath joins us now with the latest. So how big of a blow will this be, not only to that relationship with Arab states, but also to the fact that we were trying to get a ceasefire in Gaza?
Yeah, Shery. I mean, it certainly doesn't help in any way, shape, or form, and I think it's going to generate quite a lot of uncertainty and concern among Gulf and Arab states, because Israel sort of, this was an unprecedented strike. They haven't hit Qatar before. This is the external officials from Hamas who are located there, and there's a negotiating team in Qatar, and that's sort of been at the centre, at the heart of efforts to bring the hostages home and to bring an end to this conflict. So for the wider region also, it just sort of Israel's taken sort of a new step, and given the Trump administration's sort of its alternative take on foreign policy, and it's sort of created this permissive environment for Israel, I suspect it's going to make the Arab and the Gulf states very nervous. And as you sort of referred to, in 2020 we had some of these countries recognise Israel. That was sort of unprecedented as well. And we had the United Arab Emirates, which is one of those countries, very, very concerned by what took place. So a lot of uncertainty, and as you say, it doesn't do anything to help bring an end to the conflict. Probably just makes that even more difficult.
Mike, we just also heard from Trump saying he was very unhappy with the way things turned out. Does this also tell us about the situation between U.S. and Israel?
Yeah, well, I mean, Avril, it's always hard to judge, because what's said publicly and what's done privately is sometimes these things are a little bit different. So you suspect the US had some indication of this, but from the timeline that we've heard, there wasn't much time there at all. And of course, President Trump was in Qatar in May. There was a lot of pledges of investment coming from Qatar. There's a huge US military base there, the biggest in the region. So it's very, very uncomfortable for President Trump in terms of being stuck between Israel, which is obviously a long-term American ally, and Qatar, which is an important player there as well. And as Trump said, he really wants to get these hostages home and bring an end to this entire conflict. But just the two sides, Israel, has a very nationalistic right-wing government, and it sort of seems to be determined to pursue this conflict to the end of destroying Hamas. And Hamas is not going to release the hostages unless Israel withdraws. So we're sort of at a stalemate there in terms of trying to get some sort of breakthrough. So it's really hard to see how some progress is made, unless perhaps the US butts heads together. But it hasn't to this stage, at least anyway.
Dozens of Hamas officials also believed to be in Turkey. Is this going to make Turkey nervous as well?
Yeah, I mean, Turkey and Israel, they were once quite close, but things have they've sort of they've drifted apart quite a lot here, and Turkey's been really quite strong in its condemnation of Israel's policies in Gaza and to expressing a degree of support almost for Hamas as well. So I'm not sure it'd make them nervous. I mean, Turkey's a member of NATO, so while Israel is all-powerful really in the region, it's become pretty clear in almost 2 years since this conflict began. And let's not forget that it began with a horrific attack by Hamas as well. Turkey is a part of NATO, so I just think that would be a step too far for Israel, even in this more permissive environment created by the Trump administration. That would just be going a bit too far. Turkey's probably one of the last safe havens really for Hamas.
Indeed, after the attacks on Hamas leaders in Syria, Iran, Lebanon, now Qatar, Turkey is on watch as well. Michael, thank you so much. Bloomberg editor Michael He for us. Now, as we've been tracking also in terms of geopolitics when it comes to trade and tariffs, the U.S. president is said to be willing to impose new tariffs on India and China, but only if EU nations do the same. The proposal is aimed at pushing President Vladimir Putin to the negotiating table with Ukraine. Bloomberg managing editor Jill Deeses joins us from Hong Kong. So, Jill, we are seeing perhaps the rhetoric from Trump about potentially higher tariffs on India and China, but only if the EU does the same. What do you make of this?
Yes, that's right, Avril. I think, well, first of all, from the Trump administration, this does appear to be yet another pressure tactic, as you mentioned, trying to bring Putin to the table on Ukraine, putting him under pressure by targeting some of those major Russian energy buyers. Obviously, Trump said, I think it was about 45 days ago or so, that, that was when he had given that 10 to 12-day deadline to Putin to bring an end to the war in Ukraine. Obviously, we're now something like quadruple the amount of time past when that order was issued here. So this is yet that other tactic. The fact, though, that it seems that Trump would only impose these tariffs if they were mirrored by the EU does present something of a sticking point here, because several nations, also including Hungary, have blocked some of the more stringent EU sanctions targeting Russia's energy sector in the past. So whether or not this is actually enough to, get the entirety of the EU to the table to try to impose these types of tariffs or sanctions, I think is still an open question here. Also, obviously, raises into question, how exactly the Trump relationship is going with countries like India, which currently is the subject of a 50% tariff because Trump was trying to, pressure India on these kinds of goods. Trump actually recently referred to Modi as his good friend, says that talks between India and the United States are kind of ongoing, but it does, sort of threaten to ratchet up tensions, particularly, I would say, on India here.
But, will the president be facing challenges at home because the U.S. Supreme Court is now supposed to review his tariffs?
That's right. So essentially, this is a Supreme Court case focused on those reciprocal or Liberation Day tariffs, those country-by-country tariffs. It does seem like the Supreme Court is willing to fast-track that, bringing that up to arguments being heard in the first week of November. So it does seem like maybe we may have an answer on those anytime soon. I would point out, though, that that doesn't necessarily mean, even if those tariffs are struck down, well, obviously that would be a pretty massive deal, that the tariff regime in general does not attempt to go ahead in some fashion. A lot of those sectoral tariffs are kind of brought up under a different case. So I think, that does just point to some of the confusing nature about how a lot of these levies ultimately came to be. You've got things issued by executive orders that is the subject of these court cases. You've got other things, that the Commerce Department has been involved in. But yeah, it at least does seem like, it may be within the next couple of months that we get some kind of an answer on the ultimate legality of those tariffs.
In the meantime, also, we are trying to digest the tariff impact on the economy. We are also seeing BLS data downward revisions after already a dismal jobs report from last week. How bad does it look in the labor market?
Yeah, the payroll revision figures are pretty substantial. I've got some numbers here for you showing that the number of workers on payroll is likely to be revised down by a record 911,000. The final statistics will come out at the beginning of next year, but I would just say two takeaways for us here. One, does put pressure, on the Fed ahead of its rate decision next week. So I think that's obviously going to be a really, really key one to look out for. And then the other thing, too, this obviously comes against the backdrop of the Trump Trump administration being quite upset with the Bureau of Labor Statistics over the scale of some of these jobs revisions. That's something that Trump in particular has really kind of put in part of his campaign here. He actually fired the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics in August. So I do think that there's particular scrutiny being paid to these types of payroll revisions because of that. But I think the ultimate takeaway here is that that does put more pressure on the Fed as we get into next week.
Jill Lacey's on the latest when it comes to the broader U.S. economy, trade, and everything that's affecting really the global macro environment. Other stories that we're following at the moment. Hundreds of South Korean workers detained in a U.S. immigration crackdown in Georgia are reportedly set to return home. Yonhap says the workers will board a chartered flight this afternoon. It comes as Korea's trade delegation also heads back after finishing working-level talks with U.S. officials in Washington. Yonhap says the talks focused on working out specifics for the trade deal struck in July. Nepal's prime minister has reportedly resigned as violent protests continue across the country. The Press Trust of India says KP Sharma Oli stepped down after hundreds of demonstrators stormed his office. The unrest stemmed from a government ban on social media platforms, which has since been lifted. But protesters are now calling for action against poor governance in Nepal. French President Emmanuel Macron has named Sébastien Lecornu to be the country's new prime minister. Lecornu, a defense minister, will become the country's fifth prime minister in 2 years. The last two premiers were ousted after trying to pass budgets that would sharply reduce France's deficit, which are the widest in the euro area. Not surprising, we saw French yield spreads topping Italy's for the first time ever in Eurozone history. French bonds really taking that hit from higher political risk premiums. Take a look at the euro right now, holding steady, but it's around the strongest level since July already, climbing back towards that 120 level. Investors really betting that it will benefit from divergence interest rate paths set not only by the ECB, but the Fed as well. Of course, we do have the ECB rate decision coming up on Thursday. Stocks 50 futures up 0.3%. More ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg. We're watching SoftBank, one of the backers of Klarna, and we have heard that some of their shareholders now raised $1.37 billion in that U.S. IPO, price above the marketed range. The company sold 34 million shares for about $40 per share, giving Klarna a market value of about $15.1 billion. Still, this current valuation is a steep drop from $45.6 billion in a $639 million investment led by Japan's SoftBank Group back in 2021. Take a look at the broader benchmarks because we're seeing those gains in the KOSPI as well. Of course, we have seen from local media that perhaps the government might be scrapping plans to revise capital gains tax rules. So this leading to more optimism over markets reform in South Korea. And of course, we also had gains over in the tech sector with the likes of Oracle, for example, surging to record highs in the extended trading session, a significant increase in bookings, an aggressive outlook for their cloud infrastructure, Nvidia coming out with a new product. So we're seeing a big liftoff when it comes to tech stocks across Asia. We'll head back to Semicon Taiwan after the break. This is Bloomberg.
Apple has introduced its latest lineup of iPhones, including the thinnest version ever, featuring enhanced cameras and longer battery life. Alongside the phones, Apple introduced updated smartwatches and AirPods as it looks to drive demand this holiday season. And we're checking in on some of these Apple suppliers in the session, and they are mostly rising. But along with that, there come some other tailwinds as well for the tech sector, including Oracle's really positive cloud infrastructure outlook, Nvidia unveiling new chips to come as well. And speaking of semiconductors, Semicon Taiwan, a key gathering for the semiconductor industry in Asia, is underway in Taipei. One of the speakers is the CEO of IMEC, a chips research and design company, which is partnered with the likes of ASML and Tokyo Electron. Let's cross over to the event where our Asia tech correspondent, Avril, is standing by with the CEO. Belle?
Thanks, Avril. Yes, I'm pleased to say that I'm joined this morning by the IMEC CEO Luc van der Hove. So thanks very much for joining us on Bloomberg TV. You're often dubbed the world's largest R&D facility for semiconductors. So what's the sort of main message that you're bringing today to the event?
Well, I believe that semiconductors is hotter than ever. I think with this enormous drive from the AI, from all these AI applications, the demand for semiconductors is skyrocketing, and especially also the push to evolve towards even more performant technologies.
Yeah, it's sort of been interesting because we continue to see these waves of concern, really, that the demand for AI could be overhyped, but each time we sort of seem to cross over that and move on. But what is also happening is that you're sort of moving beyond the large language models now, and you've got greater AI applications. What does that mean then for the evolution of semiconductors as well?
Well, we've seen this exponential increase in demand for semiconductors, or better for compute performance, and one could say that with large language models now we've seen kind of the emergence of new models that require less compute power. So you may expect that this demand for semiconductor performance may level off, but that we believe is not going to be the case. In fact, on the contrary, we believe that the adoption of AI is just going to accelerate by having more availability of maybe simpler models. And then you have the transition, as you mentioned, towards agentic AI, physical AI. So you will have these much more complex, heterogeneous models, and all of that we believe is going to continue to drive an exponential increase or demand for advanced computing. And so we believe it's not going to slow down at all.
You, as an R&D facility, you're sort of working 2, 3, maybe even more steps ahead of where we are today. I mean, if TSMC, for instance, is ramping up to 2 nanometer, you just saw Nvidia as well overnight announcing this sort of specialized GPU for inference as well. I mean, how specialized are we going to be becoming in chips, and do we have the technology today to make that possible?
Yeah, well, I think that we will have to bring together innovations basically from all sides. On the one hand, models will evolve, as we just discussed. We will get much more complex models, but we'll have to have a lot of progress and innovation in the model side. But these models will change very quickly. So we will also need chips, that architectures, designs of chips that we need to kind of adjust towards those new models. And then in order to enable all of this, we will need to have much more performant silicon technologies, because the big problem with this exponential increase in amount of compute power is of course the energy consumption is exploding in an exponential way, and that's clearly is not sustainable. And so in order to address that, we need innovations both at the model level, at the architectures. We need new innovative architectures, and we need technology evolutions towards low power, power efficient computing. And so we will need to bring together everything in order to satisfy this insatiable demand for data and power.
What's the role then for Europe? Because of course Europe has some pretty ambitious plans or projects in the chip space with the EU Chips Act. I think it wants to have 20% of global share by the end of the decade. Are we on track for that to be happening, do you think?
I think if we look at this global picture, I think that we really have to collaborate across the continents. If we want to achieve these tremendously aggressive requirements as brought to us by AI, I don't think one continent alone can do that. We're very strong advocates for global collaboration and specialization, and we have to start from our strengths and connect the strengths. If the targets are so aggressive that you really need to combine the best of the best, and if every region tries to do everything on their own, I mean, you can't be the best in everything. So if we want to get the best possible progress, we need to combine the best of the best. And that's where I think Europe then also has to contribute, starting from our strengths. our strengths are things like ASML, of course, which is a huge strength, the R&D, but also in like Edge AI, there is a lot of, I think this is going to be another next wave. And I believe that we have to start from those strengths to make sure that Europe strengthens its position in the global value chain. But it's very important to connect the strengths across the world.
Yeah, because that is one thing you see. It's sort of like specialised focuses for each region. So, fabs are here, but then you've got some materials that come from Japan, and you've got the OSATs that are in Southeast Asia. I mean, go a little bit more and then on what you think Europe can do around the edge. Where can it build out a sort of specialised capability in that space?
Yeah, of course, Europe has a very strong position in terms of several edge applications like industrial robots. Automotive, of course, is an extremely hot topic in terms of AI also. So I believe that in Europe we should start from those strengths and then grow in the value chain, make sure that we also create important dependencies on Europe as there are dependencies on the other parts of the world. And that's how we can bring the system in equilibrium, we believe.
You've had a long-standing partnership with ASML. I mean, you mentioned that major equipment maker, very specialised equipment as well. Early this week, they announced a major investment into Mistral, which is the French AI company. I won't ask you to comment specifically on that deal, but what do you think about that sort of scale of investment and Europe investing into Europe? Is that what is needed as well to build out capabilities on the continent?
I fully agree that we need to, if you want to become a player in this field, it requires serious investments. And so I think that, and this also fits very well in the ambition of the CHIPS Act, we need to invest at a higher scale, at a higher level in some of these initiatives. Yes, absolutely.
Is there enough funding and appetite, though, do you think, in Europe as well?
I think it's one of the big challenges we have is availability of large amount of risk capital, and this is what we should, where I think Europe should step up, and I very much appreciate the move of ASML. I think that's a very good example.
Are there enough projects, do you think, as well to be invested into in Europe?
I think with what we're doing at IMEC, we create, I think, an enormous innovation base, and we are incubating lots of new initiatives, new startups, also in these fields, dealing with for example, new memory technologies optimized for AI. So I think we have a lot of opportunities in Europe. I think the missing link or the area where I think we should further improve is indeed to step up some of these initiatives to real big scale-ups, and that's where you need the risk capital I was referring to.
All right, Luc, thanks very much for your time this morning. Enjoy the conference as well. That was the IMEC CEO, Luc van den Hove, as we get Semicon Taiwan underway for another year.
Yeah, Annabelle Drillers there joining us from Taipei, and we'll have more from that conversation at Semicon Taiwan. We'll be speaking with TSMC supply chain member CSUN and Taiwanese chip testing and packaging services provider PTI. Also, industrial computer maker Advantech telling us what's driving their growth. A tech sector, a big one to watch in the South Korean trading session, as the KOSPI is now trading above its record high closing level. Remember, that level was achieved back in July 2021 during the height of the COVID pandemic. Retail investors really pushed the stock market higher. Since then, we've been sort of lagging behind, but now we're seeing that record high closing level being topped today. We had news also coming from Donga-ilbo, the local newspaper, saying that the government could be scrapping plans to revise a capital gains tax rule. Remember, this would be killing the plan to lower the threshold of large shareholders subject to taxes to 1 billion won from the current 5 billion won. So there is a lot of optimism about reforms and changes in the markets in South Korea that has led to a lot of foreign inflows this year. You can see the KOSPI trading at that 32.99 level at the moment, Avril.
Yeah, and underpinning this optimism, the gains we're seeing in the chip-making related stocks, SK Hynix, Samsung Electronics, we're seeing them going from strength to strength. SK Hynix is the big boost for the KOSPI today, also tracking what we're seeing among Apple suppliers. In the meantime, staying on tech, Microsoft reportedly set to use Anthropic's AI models in Office 365, marking its biggest move yet to reduce reliance on OpenAI. Tech news outlet The Information reported that Anthropic's Claude reportedly outperforms GPT-5 in tasks such as building PowerPoint decks and handling financial functions in Excel. OpenAI models will still power some Microsoft Copilot's features, but Anthropic will take on more advanced work, all at the same $30 per user per month. Shares of major lithium producers slipped after news that CATL is gearing up to restart its lithium mine sooner than previously anticipated. Executives are said to have asked for frontline workers to be recalled. Production at the Tianxiawo mine in China's Yichuan was stopped last month due to an expired license, stoking speculation it was part of China's tougher stance on overcapacity. An Indian appeals court has directed the country's securities regulator to respond to allegations that it withheld documents crucial to Jane Street's defense in a market manipulation case. The regulator has been asked to reply within 3 weeks to Jane Street's claims. SEBI has accused the trading firm of market manipulation to book hefty profits. We'll have more ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg. Let's take a look at how futures are faring for the U.S. following on from the BLS downward revision for jobs data. In accordance, I think that's really spurring these rate cut bets from the Federal Reserve. Futures are ticking up slightly after already reaching a record high. But we are also focused on data to come out of China, where CPI and PPI data are due. In terms of the factory gate deflation, that is expected to have narrowed, so a bit of a narrowing of the declines. But we have a consensus expectation that the CPI data goes into deflation after, I think, coming in at 0 for the month of July. Does that feed into expectations of further stimulus from Chinese authorities that will be helpful for stocks overall in China, as we've been seeing them climbing? In the meantime, these Chinese insurance firms have also been increasing their equity exposure to the highest level in at least 3 years, and they're heeding Beijing's call to build a slow and steady bull market. Bloomberg's Charlotte Yang joins us now from Hong Kong. So, Charlotte, now that we seem to be getting authorities pushing insurers in this direction, how supportive has that been for stocks?
Yeah, so I think the impact is already quite visible for the broader market, which we have, for the first half this year, the Chinese insurance as an industry, their equity exposure has increased by 610 billion yuan, and that has pushed the total equity exposure to 3.5 billion yuan, and that's about 8.5% of the total assets, and that's the highest level in 3 years. The onshore market has been doing pretty well last month, which you had some key indexes, touching a decade high. Obviously, that's not just because of the liquidity from insurers. We also have, liquidities coming from retails and also other state affiliated financial institutions as well. But I think what's more important is that the insurers, as the authorities have wished, they're now becoming a part of these long-term patient capital, to support a sustainable development of the equity market. And Morgan Stanley is expecting that the Chinese insurance will pour 1 billion yuan into the onshore equity and Hong Kong equity market this year, and with more to come next year. So it could be a very structural story we're talking here.
How much of this trend is also a reflection of the deeper troubles in the markets in China?
Yes, definitely, Shery. So this is really, a mix of policy push, but as well as some pragmatism of portfolio management from the Chinese insurers themselves. So on one hand, you have it crystal clear from Beijing that they doesn't want those, spikes. We've had the boom and bust cycles in the Chinese equity market. They want a slow, steady bull market. So which is why they have, encouraged insurers with specific measures such as mandating, the large state-owned insurers to invest 30% of the new policy premiums into the onshore equity market. But on the other side, the insurers, they're looking for high yields, with low bond yields in China. And some of those, they used to be their favorite investment products tied to the Chinese property market. That's no longer working too risky. We're talking about those trust products. And equity, especially those dividend-paying stocks, such as the banking sector, as well as even the insurance stocks as well, and also some new economy stocks that offers growth, they're looking more attractive. As these Chinese insurers, seeking higher investment returns. So it's really a mix of policy push as well as those insurance coming from the mass counting, coming from the bottom up in terms of seeking higher returns.
Bloomberg Charlotte Yang there with the latest on the Chinese markets. But take a look at how the South Korean market is trading right now, because the KOSPI is now above that closing record high that we saw back in 2021. And we're being led higher by financials, information tech, utilities as well. Of course, a big day for tech across Asia with those Apple suppliers in focus, not to mention the gains to record highs by Oracle in extended trading. But let's bring in Bloomberg's Yu-Kyung Lee. Yu-Kyung, because the South Korean story may also be a more reform-driven story.
That's exactly right. So I think the long midterm, the recent triggers to the KOSPI's latest gain is the policy expectation that the government will be pushing out more reform push that would fuel the corporate governance reform, and which will lead to the higher shareholder returns. A similar story that a lot of global investors have seen in Japan, that could happen in South Korea. So such expectations has been driving the flows from the global investor to South Korea. And I think we have to also point out that yesterday and today we had some local media reports showing some of the favorable tax move by the government, something that retail investor has been pushing for. So basically, this tax-related news regarding the capital gains tax on the stock investment is also helping the KOSPI's rise today. And now I just saw that the KOSPI has been up above the record high level, but it's down a little bit. So we'll see for the rest of the day how the trades go, whether it really closes at the record high closing level.
This is really an extension of one of the world's hottest stock rallies this year. Where does the KOSPI go from here?
Yeah, so one of the reasons that KOSPI was able to draw so much global funds inflow is that because the level of the KOSPI has been so cheap. There's this word called Korea discount, and even compared with other emerging markets in Asia, KOSPI has remained really cheap. But with the almost 40% gain so far this year, investors may not find the level as attractive as before. So the rally from here may slow down a little bit. We might still see some of the KOSPI's downside getting limited because there is a really good news coming from the global AI CAPEX spending that is expected to support some of the largest chip makers in South Korea. So the chip makers are expected to perform pretty well from here, which will provide the floor to the KOSPI. So, but where does it go from here? It largely depends on some of the corporate actions that investors are hoping to see from South Korea in response to the latest reform measures that the government has been pushing on. So the rally will largely depend on how the companies respond to the reform measures that the government has been pushing for, whether they issue more dividends to the investors, and whether they increase shareholder returns to make their stocks more attractive. That will determine where the KOSPI goes from here from now on.
Yu-Kyung, thanks so much. Great to get your insights on this. Bloomberg's Yu-Kyung Lee in Seoul. We'll have more ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg.
Take a look at how Japanese assets are trading as we've now heard the date for the ruling LDP's leadership election on October 4th. It will be a full-scale contest, and the format could be helping the two likely front-runners, Shinjiro Koizumi and Sanae Takaichi, which of course will have implications for the broader markets and the economy, especially when it comes to monetary policy as well. Our senior stocks reporter Hideyuki Sano is with us because it's also a big day here today, Hide, because we have the 5-year JGB auction, and this will be the first one after Ishiba announced his resignation.
Right. So at the moment, we have a mixed view on this current auction. Yesterday, Bloomberg reported that the BOJ is still considering chances of rate hike by the end of this year. So that affected JGB futures prices, and so there's a bit of caution about the auction. On the other hand, and since the start of this week, people have been talking about the LDP leadership election, and there's speculation that one of the strongest contenders would be Sanae Takaichi, who favors a very aggressive fiscal and monetary easing. So at the moment, we have very mixed views, but summarizing all this, I would say our bond reporters seem to think that as long as the 5-year yield above 1.1%, then there would be reasonable demand for the.
And it's really an indication of the other auctions that we have coming up, 20-year and 40 years as well, right? But as you said, it's really about understanding perhaps what the Bank of Japan might do in relation also to perhaps more fiscal taps being opened.
Right, yeah. I mean, that's a very complicated question, of course. But on the other hand, I think what's attracting a lot of investors is that basically a lot depends on the course of the U.S. economy, right? And obviously, politicians can say a lot of things, but I mean, the reality is, I mean, even there's no consensus even within the LDP. Yesterday, we have one of powerful LDP politician Taro Kono saying that he favors a rate hike. People are really focusing on the inflation data from the U.S. and how the tariffs are impacting the U.S. economy.
Right, our senior stocks reporter Hideyuki Sano here with a view of where the Japanese economy may be headed, which is, of course, a very complicated question. We'll also be watching those oil-related stocks in today's trading session, given, of course, the rising geopolitical tensions in the Middle East. That's it from the Asia trade. Our markets coverage continues. The China show is next. This is Bloomberg.